The restaurant hummed with the gentle murmur of evening conversations. Soft jazz melodies floating through air thick with the aroma of fresh bread and wine. Candlelight flickered from each table's center, casting warm shadows against rich mahogany walls and cream-colored linens. It wasn't a five-star establishment, but it was the nicest place Isabella Chen had ever entered for a date. She stepped inside hesitantly, the brass bell above the door announcing her arrival with what felt like unnecessary fanfare. Her trembling hands smoothed the sides of her vintage pearl-colored dress, a treasured piece that had belonged to her late mother. The fabric showed signs of age at the seams, but it fit perfectly at her waist, transforming her into someone who might actually belong in such an elegant setting. Isabella had spent 2 precious hours that afternoon curling her long black hair in her cramped studio apartment, carefully applying the minimal makeup she could afford. Her lips wore a soft rose shade, but her nerves remained completely exposed. "Reservation for Isabella," she told the hostess, her voice steadier than her racing heartbeat suggested. "Right this way, miss." She followed the woman to a small corner table by the window, where soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere that seemed to wait expectantly for something magical to happen. Isabella sat carefully, clutching her worn purse in her lap, knees pressed together beneath the crisp tablecloth. She checked her phone. 6:45 p.m. 15 minutes early. Exactly as planned. She needed time to breathe, to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Isabella had met Marcus on a dating app after months of hesitation. His messages seemed thoughtful and genuine, never pushy or inappropriate. When he'd suggested this restaurant, she'd initially hesitated due to the obvious expense, then agreed because something in his communication style suggested sincerity. At a table across the dining room, a man in a charcoal gray suit absently stirred his glass of aged whiskey. Daniel Rivers had just concluded a particularly challenging board meeting, but the day's tension hadn't followed him into this peaceful space. Instead, his attention settled on the young woman by the window who had entered with such visible hope mixed with nervous excitement. Something about her reminded him of his younger self, back when he still believed that good things could begin with a simple look across a restaurant table. Minutes crawled by like hours. 15 became 30, then 45. Isabella shifted uncomfortably, checking her phone repeatedly. No messages. She scrolled through Marcus's last text from that afternoon. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Beautiful. At 7:30, she sent a careful message. "Hi. I'm here at our table. Just checking in." Silence. At 7:45, she gathered courage to call. One ring, then straight to voicemail. A server approached with practiced diplomacy. "Miss, would you like to order something? We're getting quite busy." Isabella's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm actually waiting for someone. Just a few more minutes. Please." She opened her small purse, revealing a carefully folded $5 bill. Her entire emergency fund. She hadn't planned to order anything substantial, hoping Marcus would arrive and suggest sharing a meal like most dates did. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A message. "Wow, you actually showed up? I was just messing around. You're not really my type. Not worth the Uber ride." Another message followed immediately. "You seem sweet. But seriously, did you think I was actually coming?" Isabella's screen blurred as the cruel words sank in. She blinked hard, forcing back the sharp sting of humiliation that threatened to spill down her cheeks. Her jaw tightened with wounded pride as the restaurant's ambient sounds, couples laughing, silverware clinking, conversations flowing, faded into meaningless static. She refused to cry here, surrounded by strangers enjoying their perfect evening dates. Daniel, still seated nearby, caught the exact moment her face changed. He hadn't overheard the conversation, but he recognized the universal language of disappointment. He watched the color drain from her features, saw how she straightened her spine as if it were the only thing preventing her from collapsing entirely. The sight struck him with unexpected familiarity. Years ago, he'd waited too, not for someone to show up, but for someone to believe he was worth showing up for. Isabella sat motionless, fingers wrapped around the napkin in her lap like a lifeline. Her face had gone pale, eyes dry but glassy with unshed tears. There was a particular rigidity in her posture that screamed her desperate wish to simply vanish. to fold herself small enough to slip through the cracks between the polished floor tiles. Daniel observed from his corner table, saying nothing but missing nothing. From the moment she'd arrived, something about her had captured his attention. That specific combination of courage and vulnerability that spoke of someone who still dared to hope despite being disappointed before. Now there was only the quiet devastation of crushed expectations written across her delicate features like a fresh bruise. He noticed how she pressed one hand gently against her stomach, the unconscious gesture of someone who was genuinely hungry. She'd been drinking only water throughout her wait. No appetizer, nothing substantial. Her eyes flickered toward the service station, as if calculating how much longer she could reasonably occupy this table before being asked to leave. Isabella reached for her thin coat with movements that seemed to require tremendous effort. Slowly, as though every action carried invisible weight, she began to stand. Her purse was already clutched in her trembling hand as she turned toward the exit. Just as she took her first step toward the door, a server appeared beside her table carrying a beautifully plated dish, herb-crusted salmon with seasonal vegetables and a glass of sparkling water with fresh lemon. "Excuse me, miss," the server said with a warm smile. "Your dinner?" Isabella blinked in confusion. "I didn't order anything. It's been taken care of," the server explained gently. "Someone requested it specifically for you, and your entire bill has been covered." Isabella froze, her eyebrows furrowing as she glanced around uncertainly. Her first instinct was fear. Was this some kind of elaborate joke? Another cruel trick to compound her humiliation? Then a calm, low voice spoke from just behind her. "It's not charity," Daniel said quietly, rising from his chair. "It's a reminder that you deserve nourishment, regardless of how others choose to treat you." Isabella turned, startled. Daniel stood with one hand resting casually on his chair back, his expression unreadable except for the genuine kindness in his dark eyes. He wasn't smiling to impress or pitying her situation. He simply saw her, really saw her, as a person deserving of basic human dignity. Without waiting for permission or invitation, he pulled out the chair across from hers and sat down. For a moment, neither spoke. The restaurant continued its evening rhythm around them, but their small corner felt suspended in time. "Take care of your own needs before trying to take care of someone else's heart," Daniel said softly. Isabella lowered herself back into her chair slowly, eyes wide with surprise. It wasn't a pickup line. It wasn't mockery. It was simply truth, spoken with a gentleness that hid deeper than she'd expected. She looked down at the perfectly prepared meal. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he replied simply. The silence that stretched between them wasn't awkward. It was honest, real in a way that felt foreign after months of shallow dating app conversations and false promises. Isabella studied him more carefully. His suit was clearly expensive, his watch understated but obviously high-end. He looked like the kind of man she'd never expect to voluntarily sit across from her. Yet his face held a calmness and curiosity that felt genuinely kind rather than condescending. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "True," Daniel acknowledged, "but I saw enough." "And what exactly did you see?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and earnest. "Someone who showed up, someone who hoped, someone who waited longer than she should have. Not because she was desperate, but because she still believes in people. That matters." Her throat tightened. No one had ever described her optimism as a strength rather than a weakness. People usually called her naive, too trusting, setting herself up for disappointment. She finally lifted her fork and took a bite. The food was warm, expertly seasoned, and it was the first proper meal she'd had in 3 days. Daniel watched her for a moment, then leaned back. "I didn't mean to interfere," he said, "but you reminded me of someone I used to be." Isabella looked up. "Who's that?" "Someone who thought he needed to become somebody else to be worth showing up for." Something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of mutual understanding, of recognition. A week later, Isabella walked into a cozy cafe tucked between the community college library and a used bookstore. It was her usual study spot when her budget allowed, typically ordering just black coffee for the free Wi-Fi. She was fumbling with her worn coin purse at the counter when a familiar voice reached her ears. "Make that too," Daniel said to the barista. "She looks like someone who might appreciate oat milk today." Isabella turned, surprised to find him seated in the corner with a laptop open. Sleeves rolled up, wearing the same calm smile. "You remembered my name," she said softly as she joined him. "I remembered your courage," he replied. The name was the easy part. They sat in comfortable quiet as morning sunlight filtered through large windows, drawing golden streaks across their shared table. The space smelled of cinnamon and roasted coffee beans, creating an atmosphere that invited natural conversation. "Do you work around here?" she asked eventually. He nodded. "Sometimes. This place is close to one of our research partners." Isabella smiled politely, unsure how to respond to his obvious wealth and success. Daniel seemed to sense her discomfort. "You know, I completely botched our last product campaign," he said with genuine humor. "We tried launching a new line of organic baby food," Daniel continued, his eyes twinkling with self-deprecating humor. "And somehow our marketing slogan ended up sounding like we were promoting candy for infants instead of nutrition. It wasn't our finest hour." Isabella let out a genuine laugh, the first real one she'd had in weeks. Daniel shared how a prominent food blogger had roasted them online, complete with a viral meme that still haunted their social media team. He recounted the disaster not with arrogance or bitter self-deprecation, but with the kind of mature humor that comes from someone who'd learned not to take professional failures personally. Isabella relaxed into her chair. No probing questions about her background. No awkward references to their restaurant encounter. No thinly veiled pity. Just a successful man sharing an embarrassing story with refreshing honesty. "That slogan sounds like something my organic chemistry professor would despise," she said with a grin. "I could use someone like you in our product development meetings," Daniel replied. She raised an eyebrow skeptically. "I'm a broke nursing student working 3 part-time jobs, not a marketing consultant." "Exactly," he said. "You understand real people better than most of our highly paid experts do." They talked for over an hour about coffee preferences, childhood food memories, and her disastrous attempt to cut her own bangs with safety scissors during finals week. The lightness of their conversation surprised Isabella. When she finally stood to leave for her afternoon classes, she expected him to ask for her number or suggest another meeting. Instead, he simply smiled, nodded respectfully, and let her go without pressure or expectation. As Isabella walked away, she realized she was smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Not because someone had rescued her, but because someone had listened, remembered details about her life, and shared honest laughter with her. For the first time in years, she felt like she'd shared time with someone not out of loneliness or desperation, but out of genuine choice and mutual interest. 2 weeks later, Daniel texted her about a nutrition workshop his company was hosting. "Thought this might align with your studies. No pressure, but the registration fee is waived if you're interested." The modest conference room was thoughtfully arranged with folding chairs facing a screen displaying colorful slides about childhood nutrition and food safety. Isabella sat in the third row wearing her light blue scrubs under a simple cardigan. Notepad ready, genuinely excited to learn. The presenter discussed early childhood nutrition, organic food safety standards, and allergen awareness in commercial products. Isabella raised her hand twice. Once to ask about preservative levels in toddler foods, and again to point out an inconsistency in allergen labeling requirements. Both times, the speaker paused, visibly impressed. "That's an excellent question," he said after her second observation. "And a really sharp catch." Daniel stood near the back in a navy blazer, watching quietly. He'd observed plenty of ambitious interns, sharp employees, and confident industry experts over the years. But there was something rare about Isabella's contributions. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or advance her career through these questions. She simply cared deeply about the subject matter, asking questions like someone who would one day be responsible for protecting children's health and safety. After the workshop concluded, while other attendees networked around the refreshment table or exchanged business cards, Isabella slipped out quietly. She headed toward her favorite library, a warm, quiet sanctuary tucked between 2 office buildings, featuring a peaceful study room overlooking a small rooftop garden. She hadn't expected to encounter Daniel there, but when she pushed through the glass doors, there he was. He stood by the children's reading corner, holding the small hand of a little girl in a yellow dress with matching ribbons in her curly brown hair. Isabella paused, blinking in surprise. Daniel looked up and smiled warmly. "Hey there, wasn't sure I'd run into you here. I just came to return some books," Isabella replied, holding up her small stack of nursing textbooks. Her eyes drifted curiously to the child who was now peeking shyly from behind Daniel's legs. "This is Emma," Daniel said softly, his voice taking on a different quality. Gentler, more protective. "My daughter. She's 4, and a little cautious with new people." Isabella crouched down to Emma's eye level, offering a genuine smile. "Hi, Emma, that's a beautiful dress." The little girl stepped forward tentatively, her tiny hand reaching out to touch the soft fabric of Isabella's cardigan. "You're pretty," Emma whispered. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're very pretty too." There was a pause as Emma leaned closer, sniffing delicately near Isabella's shoulder. Then she whispered with the brutal honesty of childhood, "You smell like Mommy used to." The air seemed to still completely. Daniel's expression froze, his breath catching in a way that spoke of old wounds and careful healing. Isabella remained motionless, understanding instinctively that she'd stepped into sacred territory. She looked at Daniel, whose face had become unreadable except for his hands, which trembled slightly as they rested on Emma's small shoulders. Isabella knelt again, speaking gently to the child. "Well, that's a very special compliment. Your mommy must have smelled like kindness and love." Emma nodded solemnly. "Daddy says she's watching us from the stars now." Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening as he blinked rapidly. He cleared his throat carefully. "Okay, little star," he murmured to Emma, "let's go pick out a book." Emma skipped toward the picture book section, leaving the two adults in a moment of heavy silence. "She passed 3 years ago," Daniel said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma doesn't usually say things like that to strangers." Isabella nodded, understanding more than she could express in words. Children remember with their hearts more than their heads. Daniel really looked at her then. Not the polite observation of their previous encounters, but a deep, searching gaze that seemed to see past all her carefully constructed defenses. For the first time since they'd met, something in his expression wasn't guarded or controlled. It was simply open, vulnerable, human. "Would you like to help us pick out a story?" he asked softly. Isabella smiled, following them toward the children's section where Emma was already pulling colorful books from the shelves, chattering excitedly about dragons and princesses and magic spells that could make sad daddies smile again. What began as accidental encounters evolved into something neither Isabella nor Daniel could easily define. She started visiting his office once a week, initially to review research documents about childhood nutrition and food safety regulations. Her background in healthcare gave her a unique perspective that most of his corporate consultants lacked entirely. But their meetings gradually extended beyond work. Isabella would linger after document reviews, sipping herbal tea in the corner of his office while Daniel prepared presentations for upcoming product launches. She had an intuitive ability to spot inconsistencies and ask the kinds of practical questions that real parents would eventually raise about ingredient labels and safety warnings. Daniel valued her insights more than most expensive consultants he'd ever hired. Yet it wasn't just her professional input that made those moments meaningful. It was her presence itself. Quiet, thoughtful, never demanding attention or special treatment. She brought a sense of calm authenticity to his often chaotic corporate world. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, when Daniel's regular childcare provider had evening classes, he would call Isabella, not as a desperate last resort, but because Emma responded to her with an ease that simplified their daily routines in remarkable ways. Isabella would collect Emma from daycare, help with homework and dinner, braid her hair before bedtime, and always read exactly 2 stories. Never 1, never 3. It became an unspoken tradition that brought structure and comfort to all 3 of their lives. Neither Isabella nor Daniel discussed their growing feelings explicitly. There were no dramatic confessions or grand romantic gestures. But when Isabella laughed at something silly, Daniel found himself watching her face longer than necessary. When he worked late into the evening, he'd draft text messages about Emma's latest amusing observations, then delete them before sending. Their relationship was fragile, real, and increasingly important to both of them. Then one March afternoon, everything changed. The letter arrived in a plain envelope bearing the letterhead of the State Nursing Scholarship Committee. Isabella stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening it with trembling hands. She read the first paragraph once, then again, then a third time before releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Full tuition coverage, accelerated 1-year program, pediatric nursing specialization, out of state. It represented everything she'd worked toward through years of part-time jobs, late-night studying, and financial struggle. The opportunity she'd quietly hoped for during those moments when her future seemed impossibly distant. But instead of pure elation, her chest tightened with conflict. Accepting meant leaving behind the quiet warmth of Daniel's companionship, missing Emma's bedtime stories, abandoning the strange but steady rhythm of something that felt remarkably like belonging. She waited 3 days before telling Daniel. They were at the neighborhood park, watching Emma chase soap bubbles while late afternoon sunlight filtered through golden leaves. "I received the scholarship," Isabella said softly, her voice barely audible above the playground sounds. Daniel turned toward her immediately, eyebrows rising with genuine pleasure. "Isabella, that's incredible news." She nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. "It's in Oregon. The program starts in August. 1 full year." Wind rustled through the trees overhead, scattering autumn leaves across their feet like nature's confetti. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Then he said simply, "You should absolutely go." Isabella's eyes snapped up, surprised by his immediate response. "You really think so?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. "You earned this opportunity through years of hard work. It's exactly what you've been striving toward." But what if she swallowed hard? What if you think I'm just abandoning everything good when it finally gets comfortable? Like I'm using you for stability and then walking away when something better comes along? Daniel's expression softened with understanding. He shook his head slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Loving someone," he said quietly, "doesn't mean holding them back from their dreams. It means refusing to clip their wings when they're ready to soar." The words settled into places within Isabella that still carried old fears of abandonment. Spaces that whispered she needed to prove her worth by staying, by choosing security over growth. She watched Emma chase a particularly stubborn soap bubble that floated just beyond her reach. The little girl's laughter ringing pure and joyful across the playground. Isabella left for Oregon in early August, the night before her departure. Daniel invited her for dinner at his house. Nothing fancy, just pasta by candlelight because Emma insisted candles made everything taste better. After dinner, Emma presented Isabella with a handmade paper chain. "1 link for every week until you come back," the little girl explained seriously. "Daddy helped me count." When it came time for goodbyes, Isabella knelt down to Emma's level. Before she could speak, Emma threw her small arms around Isabella's neck and whispered with the profound wisdom of childhood. "You're not really going far away. Daddy says hearts don't care about distance." Isabella closed her eyes, holding the little girl tighter than she'd ever held anyone. It was the kind of goodbye she'd never experienced before. One without guilt, without fear of being forgotten, filled only with love and genuine support. She looked up at Daniel, who stood by the doorway with his hands in his pockets, eyes warm but unreadable. No desperate promises, no wait for me declarations. Just a silent understanding that something real could survive separation. That authentic love didn't demand constant proximity to remain strong. Isabella cried that night, but not from sadness or abandonment. She wept because for the first time in her life, she was being released with blessing rather than being left behind with disappointment. The year in Oregon transformed her completely. Intensive coursework, demanding clinical rotations, and nights when she missed home more than she'd thought possible. But she emerged stronger, more confident in her abilities, and absolutely certain of who she was becoming. When Isabella returned to the city the following summer, she walked through the hospital's staff entrance wearing her crisp new uniform. Registered nurse printed beneath her name in bold letters. She had done it, survived the grueling program and earned her pediatric nursing certification. Just before lunch on her first day back, a colleague handed her an elegant white envelope. "There's an event this afternoon," the nurse said with a knowing wink. "You're specifically invited." The invitation was simple yet elegant: product launch celebration. First steps, a celebration of nourishment, growth, and new beginnings. Location: rooftop garden. Rivers Nutrition Company. Time: 3 p.m. Isabella knew immediately who had sent it. At exactly 3 o'clock, Isabella stepped out of the elevator into Daniel's company's rooftop garden. A breathtaking space lined with flowering herbs, hanging string lights, and rows of white chairs arranged around elegant display tables. The centerpiece featured pastel-colored product packaging, each box marked with beautiful script: first steps for the families who nurture hope with every meal. Isabella stopped in her tracks, her throat tightening as she examined the design more closely. The packaging was subtle yet meaningful, featuring a silhouette of a woman holding a child close, a spoon in her other hand, an image that felt both universal and deeply personal. Daniel stood near a small podium, addressing a gathered crowd of investors, employees, and local press. His voice carried the confidence she remembered, but when his eyes met hers across the rooftop space, the corners of his mouth lifted in a smile meant only for her. He concluded his presentation with gracious professionalism, shook hands with several attendees, then walked directly toward her through the crowd. "I wasn't certain you'd come," he said softly. "I wasn't sure you'd still remember me after a whole year," Isabella replied. "Impossible," Daniel said, his eyes warm with unmistakable affection. They stood together for a moment, the celebratory noise fading into background as they simply looked at each other, cataloging the small changes a year had brought to their faces, their confidence, their understanding of themselves. Then slowly, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee dramatically or speak in flowery declarations. He simply opened it, revealing a delicate ring with a single, perfect stone that caught the afternoon light. "I don't want to rescue you," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady and sure. "I want to choose to stay. If you'll let me, I want to build something real together." Isabella stared at the ring, then at Daniel's face, older than when they'd first met, eyes still carrying traces of past pain but now softened by something deeper: hope, certainty, peace. She didn't cry or tremble with overwhelming emotion. She simply nodded with calm conviction, not because the moment felt like a fairy tale, but because for the first time in her life, she was choosing love from a place of strength rather than need, from wholeness rather than desperation. "Yes," she said simply. 3 months later, they returned to the same restaurant where their story had begun. This time, Isabella walked in hand with Daniel, while Emma skipped ahead in her favorite navy dress, pigtails bouncing with each step. The hostess led them to a corner table, the same one where Isabella had once sat alone, nervous and hopeful, except now there were 3 chairs, and no one was waiting for someone else to show up. As they settled in together, Emma pulled out a folded piece of paper from her small backpack. A crayon drawing of 3 stick figures around a dinner table, with a yellow sun smiling overhead. "This is our family," Emma announced proudly, "and we're all exactly where we belong." Isabella reached across the table and took Daniel's hand, then Emma's small one, creating a circle of connection that felt unbreakable. "You were never late," Isabella whispered to Daniel, eyes shining. "I just needed to believe long enough for the right moment to arrive." Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. But inside their small corner of the world, 3 hearts had found their home.